So all that to say, when my dad died and like I'm having to like talk to these people and I'm
Right.
like reconnecting with these people and they're mourning their loss of this person in their life. And then I'm like simultaneously trying to explain to them why I'm partly relieved, partly sad, partly mad. Because I, for the longest, have been wanting to ask my dad some of these questions. Like, what did you talk to that little boy about after you caught him fondling me? Or why did you punish me so harshly? Or like, there's so many things that you
Mhm.
never now get the answers to, right?
Hey, y'all, welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast, where we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety from within the BIPOC community. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and today we have Chris. I will just say I've been following Chris for a while now, and quite frankly, just a beacon of motivation, of hope, of joy. You can tell that she is a staunch advocate for radical self love, and just kind of considering the message and how she conveys it, you can't help but feel that it's deeply rooted in her own journey of healing and reconciliation. So I'm not going to talk much more about it. So let's get into it. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So, so excited.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I want to jump right into it and go all the way back to the root of kind of your story with alcohol, and maybe just give us a sense of when did that relationship begin? What was your why for drinking? And then chronologically, we'll just kind of move all the way through to where you found the light of sobriety, and talk about all the fantastic things that you're doing today.
Certainly, certainly. Well, this was a lifestyle that I was born into, kind of feel like I inherited it, and the torch was passed to me, and then I extinguished it when I decided to get sober and forge a new way forward without it in the dark. Now I'm in the light, so God bless, I can look back and be grateful for all the trials and tribulations along the way. But it goes way back generationally. But my grandparents, on my dad's side, they were alcoholics and addicts of all kinds. Same on my mom's side. I'm biracial, so my dad was black, and he is the parent that raised both my older brother and I. My parents got divorced when I was 3, and then my mom basically just bounced. And my dad was an alcoholic long before I came into the world. And I don't think the divorce helped. He was a product of trauma. He was a black man growing up in 1950s LA. He's
Mm,
very proud. He was very proud of the fact that he could pass a comb through his hair. He said, I was the only kid at Dorsey High School who could pass a comb through my hair. So
yeah.
he was so proud of being black, or at least not black. He was so proud of being, of passing. We never talked about blackness, actually. We never talked about race. I remember coming home one day at a young age because some kid had made fun of me for being brown, not knowing what I was. And I remember asking my dad, but like, what is it to be black? What's that? What's that race thing? He's like,
Mm,
there's only one race. It's the human race. Nothing else matters. That very colorist, blind, approach.
yeah.
Um, but all that to say, I was born into this lifestyle, so I grew up watching it. Although I never really understood that my dad was an alcoholic, I just thought that he had some weird switch that was flipped at some point in the day where like he was fine, and then at some point he wasn't, and he was angry, and he was hostile, and he was abusive and aggressive and invasive and toxic and a predator, really.
Mm,
And so from a very early age, as were my uncles and my aunts and my grandmother. My grandmother, God bless her to this day, we've now rectified and healed that relationship actually just recently, like within the past like month and a half or so.
mm,
Um, Again, another lady, very charismatic, very lovely, but as soon as she got a drink in her, would tell me that my uncle's dog was a better granddaughter than me, that she wouldn't know me from anyone else on the street if my dad didn't conceive me. My dad would say similar things to me as well. Don't you think I'd rather crawl into a field and die? I was forced to raise you. You were an obligation. We're adult child. It was a whole litany of things.
mm,
And so
yeah.
growing up, seeing all of this around me, I had vowed to myself, I will never become an alcoholic. I will never smoke cigarettes. I'll never become an alcoholic. I'm never going to do those things. And I thought that I could evade that, but I didn't know. You don't know these things as a kid, that what you are watching happening, it just becomes a part of your own fabric. It becomes a part of how you interpret the best way to navigate situations as an adult. So drinking for me was fun, in my
Mm,
late teens. I I used my trauma to go in. So I'd realized that the only way I could escape my environment is if I went to college. So instead of lashing out against the trauma that I was experiencing and the abuse that I was experiencing, I just went in and focused on all the shit that like could get me out of this place.
Mm,
Um, at least, or it, that's a, I don't think that's accurate. I think, to be honest, my education was probably the only thing I felt like I could control.
right.
If I'm like thinking honestly now and looking back in retrospect. So I threw myself into that world because I could, it was very validating. My teachers validated me. They were like my parents.
Mm,
Um, and so I went the opposite direction, right? I could have been a hooker on the street, but instead I was like, I'm gonna be a hooker in the classroom and just pimp myself out for knowledge. And alcohol at the time was fun. It was fun. Life was still simple. My dad had kicked me out when I graduated from high school, graduated top of my class, went straight to UCLA. But my dad had kicked me out because I was starting to, at that time, try to develop a relationship with my mom, reaching
hmm
out and trying to search for her and find her. And he was not happy about that. So he said, she can pay for your college education. And so that was kind of the beginning of the fissure of that, of the closeness of that relationship, because I'd been stuck in the house with my father until up until that point. He kicked me out. I went to college, and it was basically like I was on my own at that point.
mm,
Um, and I think that's when life started to get real. You know, obviously, I'm 17. I'm in the world. I'm on my own. I'm having to pay for a college education and like for money. Who up until that point, my father had been so controlling. I wasn't allowed to work. There were things I just weren't allowed to do. And so now I'm completely self sufficient, independent, but like have no real like life skills. So I got a job at like the In and Out, the local burger place in by UCLA, and was like working 40 hours a week and going to school and paying my bills, and life was starting to get a little bit more complicated, and so alcohol became a little bit less fun and a more like mm, numbing maybe in a way, you
hmm
know. Also that mixed with like a little bit of liquid courage because I was trying to figure out who I was. It's college.
Yeah.
And like, there's no rules. I can be anything I want to be. And I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship with a man at the time. I was with John Smith for all of high school, and then he broke up with me my first year. So then I was like, I can date women. I can do whatever I want. And alcohol became the it lit this spark for my social butterfly because up until that point I'd been very introverted, very shy, not very confident, not very secure in who I was. And so it was fun. And then just over time, it just became, I'd say over the course from like 18 to 25, it became gradually more destructive. And then
hmm
from 25 to when I got sober at 31, it was incredibly destructive. But what the marker was, the spiral, my spiral was long. Um, it was my dad's death marked the beginning of my spiral, which lasted about 2 years before I got sober. Um, and leading up to my dad's death, he'd been like passing out in his car, being found just like so drunk and just like having a heart attack. Like just things were happening with his health. And I had started to go down to the neighborhood and talk to his neighbors and just like let them know that if you see my dad passed out in the street, just give me a call. I'll come down and get him into the house. Like his health is kind of waning, and I don't know if you know, but he's an alcoholic, and so and he's retired. 'Cause at that point, he told me he had retired. He was a school teacher.
hmm
Come to find out later, he was fired for something indecent.
Well,
Um, but so I kind of instituted like this neighborhood watch. And so they'd started to call me a little bit for like, oh, your dad's car hasn't moved. And so I'd pop down and knock on the door and just check on him every so often. He could lock the doors to the house from the inside with a key. So like there was just no way of getting into the house from outside if that inside lock was locked, right? So
right.
I'd gone down a couple times and like wasn't able to get access. And my brother and I at this point had gotten a little bit numb to the experience of or the possibility that one of these days we might find him dead. But
Yep.
every time he'd end up either opening the door or like calling us later, texting us later that he was fine. Well, whatever. Flash forward, it was like I believe it was September 28th, 2015 in the daytime. I got a phone call from the neighbor that the car hadn't moved, mail hadn't been checked, newspapers were stacking up. We're like, okay, round. 82 of this nonsense. My brother and I are decide we'll go down to the house after I get off work. And so my brother gets there before I do because he happened to live in the same town as my father. I lived in Beverly Hills at the time, and they lived down in the suburb of LA. And as I'm getting up to the street to pull left onto the street that we lived on, there's an ambulance and a fire truck that passes by, and I'm like, shit, I'm pretty sure. And they turn onto my street. I'm like, that's pretty sure that's for my dad's house. My brother calls me and he's like, you don't come, don't bother coming. I was like,
Mm.
I'm around the corner. I'm just gonna pull up. And so I pull up, and the fire department had to ram the front door in because, like I said, it was like a fucking fortress locked from the inside. And my dad was dead and had been dead for some time, a week, maybe 2 weeks in the middle of the
Really?
summer. So it
Yeah.
was like a massive heat wave. The smell of death had just wafted out of the house and into the neighborhood. And at this point, my dad had developed, or devolved, I should say, into being a hoarder and a pack rat. And so the house was just literally up to your waist, just trash and garbage and just shit every boxes, random like stuff from the home shopping network and papers and rat feces and roaches and flies and maggots and everything
Man.
that eats a dead body, right? And the first thing, as they start bringing it, actually, the first thing I said when I got out of the car was, I need to go get a drink. And I walked down. At this point, I was drinking very regularly and was definitely an alcoholic, and that had definitely manifested in my life, much like you expressed to me earlier. I was a high functioning alcoholic. I learned from the best. My dad was a sixth grade teacher. He taught the children of America completely
Yeah.
inebriated all the time. I learned how to be, I was a high functioning alcoholic at graduating from UCLA. Like I learned how to do life. Um, but yeah, I was like, I need to go down the street, and that's that spiraled everything. So I walked down the street, got little mini bottles of vodka, and just took them to the head real quick. As I'm come back and I'm talking to the police officer about like, what do we do now? What are our next
Yeah.
steps? Like, what the fuck is? It's 9 o'clock at night. Who do you call? What are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
Um, and then spent the next couple of days with my brother scraping the decomposed body off the floor because we had to like flip the house. We'd never been through any of this shit before. We're figuring out what the fuck we're supposed to do. Um, and it sped up my spiral, my right to rock bottom so fast, and got to a point where I couldn't even go back to that house. It was just too much emotionally, digging through all the trash and trying to sort out what to keep, what to get rid of, what's important, what's not. Like, and it was disgusting. It was disgusting. And that happened, mind you, I think right after I got fired from my job for being an alcoholic.
Mm.
That job was so kind. They caught me drinking on the job. They gave me the chance to get sober. They encouraged me to get therapy. I was trying it, but like an addict won't get sober until they are ready and willing to do the work, right? Like the reason has to be within them, not for any other reason. And so
Yeah.
it didn't stick. And they gave me another chance, and they ended up firing me. And then shortly after, that's when my dad died. And then shortly after that, I actually interviewed for a new job because I can't not work. I'm just, again, high functioning alcoholic. Also have to follow the rules because my dad was in the military. So anytime I did anything wrong, punishment was super strict.
Yeah.
Um, so I play by the rules. So it's got to get a job. So I interviewed for a job, and right after my dad died, that's actually when I started at the company that I'm still at today. So
Okay.
that's to say I have been through this job. I will bless this company, bless the people that I work with, but they, much like your beloved wife, have seen me go from being a hot mess express at work to being like the golden star example for everyone else to follow. Because those first 2 years, uh, right after my dad's death, I started working as an executive assistant for the chief marketing officer at this company,
So
and a
high
couple of
pace.
other, oh yeah, and a lot of other high level executives as well. And oh my God, when I tell you, I would drink and just like I would pass out in the bathroom stalls. I'd have to get picked up from work. My best friend, God bless her, she's my wife, or my version of your wife. She was with me for the from the beginning before I was an alcoholic to this day.
Mm.
She was my angel. Um, but if she'd have to pick me up from work early, there were moments when like I'd have to be carried into the lift ride to get home. I'd pass out in alleys when I would try to walk home. It was a hot mess. I was sent out on one medical leave I was actually forced onto a medical leave by a therapist I was seeing for an eating disorder at the time. Because not only wasn't I an, when I not only was I an alcoholic, but I developed an eating disorder in my alcoholism. Started out before I was an alcoholic, but it was exacerbated by the alcoholism because it started out as wanting to control and ended up being I don't want anything in my body to get in the way of this alcohol because I need it to do its job and like not allow me to feel right.
Right.
Um, and so I was first pushed out on my first medical leave to address the eating disorder. And so 3 weeks sober there, come home, start drinking, even though I'm in the outpatient program for the eating disorder. And I make it through like I think another year, year and a half, still drinking. And God, there was this angel who was in HR at my company, and she was literally there for maybe 4 months. When I came back from my second medical leave, she'd left. I think she was just there to save my job and save
Mm.
my life. But she was this beautiful, beautiful Black woman named Melva. God bless her. Thank you, Melva. She pulled me to the side and she said, Chris, they want to fire you. Go on medical leave, get your life together, come back and get your shit together. And I said, okay. So
Yeah.
I went on that second medical leave. The first month, still was drinking. Second month, still was drinking. I went to get that next doctor's note to say, "Oh, I'm too, stressed out and traumatized by life. I can't work." And the doctor was like, "I can't get you another extension." And I was like,
Mm.
Okay, now I know the jig is up. There's no more time. I am either going to do everything differently and have a different outcome in a different life, or I'm going to keep doing this crazy dance and being miserable and hating life and drink myself to death like my dad. Those are my two
Right.
options. I got 30 days to do it because that's when my note was only for 30 more days. So I
Mm.
said, okay. And I checked myself into a sober living. It didn't take insurance. So I humbled myself and I asked a family member for some cash. And I said, I'm going putting myself into sober living. I need to get my life together. I'll get you the cash back. I promise I'm good for it. I just don't have it up front. Can I get a check? And so my uncle, God bless his spirit, gave me the check. I put myself in sober living on October 30th. No, October 31st, which was, I believe, a Monday. Oh no, I went Sunday night because that's the day after my birthday.
Okay.
Um,
So one
and
last hurrah maybe, and then
yeah, it wasn't even a drink. I didn't drink before I went and I smoked weed because I knew in
okay.
sober living they pee tested you. You couldn't do anything in sober living, right? So
Right.
so I was like I gotta have a little smoke of a joint before I go into the joint, you know. So I smoked a little bit and then checked myself into the sober living, and the first 3 days, oh, it was so painful. I was writhing in my skin.
Yeah.
It was a sober living with other women, and it felt very much like being back in high school, and they were all white, and it was like I'm the only fucking brown person here, and I'm the only person who's like got any type of self-awareness, any type of sense, any type of real like know-how on how to get a hold of this thing called life. Other folks are here because like they're forced to be. Like, what is this? Third day I had my therapy session with my therapist, who I've been on this road with since before my dad died.
Mm.
She said, Chris, you just have like you have no option. You can't drink, so you just have to do something else. What do you like to do? What brings you joy? What fulfills you? I said, helping people. I love volunteering. And she said, okay, do that. And so that Thursday, which was the next day, I decided the program was for me. Well, in sober living, we had to go to AA meeting at least once a day. So
Okay.
since that was the mandate, I was like, well, I got to go to one meeting a day. And I love connecting with people and sharing shame, right? Like I
Hmm.
love hearing other people's shame. Makes me feel like it's not so heavy. So I decided I'm going to go to a meeting in the morning. I'm going to go to a meeting in the afternoon, and I'm going to go to a meeting in the evening because I have nothing else to do. And then in between, I'm going to volunteer. So I did that for the rest of my stint, my first 30 days in the sober living, up until I had to go back to work, which was on my 31st day of sobriety. So at
Hmm.
that point, I'd gone to 90 meetings in 30 days, and I'd volunteered at like a litany of places because that's just like I had nothing else to do, which set me up for complete success going back into the real world because on my 31st day, I moved back into my apartment, went back to work. I was back in reality, right?
Hmm.
It was just like, there you go. And at that point, I'd what I'd done is I'd swapped tools. Like the drink was no longer the tool for me. It was either a meeting or it was a book or it was volunteering. It was the whole um I really understood. I never had a craving. Once I decided I wasn't going to drink, once I took it off the table, it was I've never to this day been like, ooh, I really need a drink. I've never felt
Yeah.
emotionally pulled to it. Sometimes it sounds nice, like they have some crazy drinks out there these days. I'm like, a White Claw would have been nice to have when I was 19, you know?
Yeah.
Better than those fruity ass fucking wine coolers I used to steal from my uncle's refrigerator. But not because I'm desiring to be disconnected or disengaged from my feeling. And I think
Right.
that's what I realized when I made the decision to do everything differently. I knew, because I'd been in therapy up until that point too. I'd understood that it's my feelings that are driving my thoughts and my behavior. So I have to do the emotional work to change the behavioral patterns. And so going back into the real world after like just drowning myself in healing and tools and like-minded hearts and trauma, I was set up for so much success. Like I basically got sober and never looked back.
That's awesome. I mean, I I don't want to jinx myself, but I mean, I feel very similar. Like once I made that call, there was no dipping the toes back into the water, so to speak. And I mean,
Right.
look, it wasn't easy, right? Like you got to like do the work. You got to go through all the things that
Mhm.
got you there in the first place. But that was a non-negotiable for me. So I feel you on that. And sometimes you got to go hard. 90 days, 90 meetings in 30 days, and volunteering. I mean, that's a deep, deep dive and life shift, to change some trajectory. I'm a strong believer that that momentum moves in both directions, right? So like when you can
Mhm.
move that pendulum and start pushing in the opposite direction, and really take advantage of that momentum, which it sounds like you did. I'm glad that you were set up for success moving in.
Man, I knew
Um,
I had to. I knew I had to because I had tried. I I'd been to AA before and like hid in the bathroom or sat in the back and played Bejeweled on my phone. I never really wanted sobriety before. Um, but I had tried for the sake
yeah,
of other people to not have a drink, right? And so I don't know, there was just something different that hit that time where it was just like I said, I removed that as an option from on the being on the table, and that made all the difference.
yeah. I mean, thank you for recounting all of that. There's so much in that last 20 minutes that I want to be able to go back to and ask you, some of which I'll probably remember, some of which I won't, but I'll do my best. Uh, One, living with your dad, being kicked out of the house, escaping into education. Sounds like you were successful in that realm. And then, ultimately your father's passing, and sounds like he kind of devolved quite a bit, over the last bit of his life there. I'm going to assume that that grieving process didn't help you at all in you managing some of your negative, kind of vicing towards alcohol. What was
Yeah,
it that was so painful? Was it
it was
seeing where
such
your
a
dad had got? Like, was it just the fact that your father had passed? Was it the fact that you had a relationship that was challenged? Like, what was it that made that so difficult for you? And I ask because, like, I feel like grief is and losing a loved one. It's one of those situations in life where if there's a bottle near you and you're drinking at the time, you're gonna reach for it pretty quickly. I've experienced grief in my sobriety, and it didn't cause me to relapse.
Mhm.
But at that was a time where I was just like, man, this shit is tough. For its own reasons. I'm curious, where were you at that point? You know, after you drove into that neighborhood and ultimately had to go down to the corner just to get a little bit to take the edge off. Like, what did the next year and a half look like for you in trying to grieve through your father's passing?
Oh man, it was such a mixed bag because um I carried a lot of unanswered questions from things I had experienced in my childhood as a direct result of his hands. And I'll say this. he caught a kid molesting me when I was like 7 or 8.
Mm,
And he grilled me about it. And as an 8-year-old, 7-year-old, you don't necessarily have the know-how or language to explain what's happening. And I can't remember like what I said. He did grill this kid, apparently. I have no idea to this day what that conversation was like, or even if he talked to the kid's parents. But as a consequence of what happened, I do remember saying, like, when he asked what happened, and I said, we were just playing, because that's what I was groomed to say.
mm,
As a result of that, this happened the summer before I went into third grade. He grounded me for my entire summer vacation and made me write the dictionary definitions for lie, deceit, fib, all those synonyms for lie. There's a lot of synonyms for lie, but I had to write the dictionary definitions of, like, as they are in the dictionary, where you break out the word with like the pronunciation and all the iterations. I had to write that out by hand, and then on the typewriter, and then on the computer. And if there was like some error on the page, because he had to review each page when I was done, I'd have to redo the page. And then when I was done with the page, I had to put it up on my wall in my bedroom. So I spent my entire summer doing that, going into third grade. He would when he bowled every Tuesday night, so he would take me with him when he went bowling to make sure I was still doing this. So I would do this at the bowling alley. His
mm,
teammates thought I was doing my homework and that I was very studious. Little did they know it was a punishment. But and that and actually, right after he caught the kid molesting me and he grilled me about it, he then took me next door to the hospital, walked me into the lobby where the nurses were sitting at the little nurses station. And he told the nurses that, like, something to the effect of, I don't remember the specific language, but something to the effect of, like, his daughter had let something happen to her. And so he had to figure out if she was infected or dirty. He needed petri dishes, tongue depressants, and cotton swabs. He took me back home. He pulled down my pants. He bent me over, spread my little butt cheeks open, swabbed me up and down, and then rubbed it in the petri dish, closed it, put it on the windowsill, and said, if anything grows in here over the course of time, just know that that's a direct result of what you allowed to happen to you. And it could be any number of these things. And at the time, he was going to Cal State Dominguez Hills to get his teaching credentials. And he was taking biology, and he opened it up to, like, I don't even know what the section was, but I just remember this visual of this was like body, overblown, bloated body. And it was this lady who had worms. He had me read the section. He was like, read this whole section and know that, like, this is what you could have.
man.
So, like, these are my very vague memories that, like, me as an 8-year-old, I'm carrying right into the rest of my life. And that's just like one day. That was one day and one summer.
Yeah,
I,
that's a
that,
lot, man.
that a lot of other things happened over the course of my life. Again, he would get drunk and he would be inappropriate. He would say inappropriate things, do inappropriate things, call me mean names in front of my friends, do weird things to my friends, say weird things in front of my friends. And so I'm carrying all this stuff. My family too is just dysfunctional. Like I said, us Black folk, like we don't like to talk about our shit, right? My dad would always say, like, you don't talk to people outside the family about our business, but we never even talk to each other about our business because all of these things were happening, right? And then he also had like weird severed dynamics with his half sister, with his half brother, with his own mother. And so I, as a consequence, didn't have a relationship with these people. That's why I told you
Right.
earlier, I'm just now remedying this broken relationship with my grandmother, although
Mm,
she was toxic too. Um, so I didn't grow up with a strong sense of family or community. I was very disconnected from my own family. I've
yeah.
always been longing for and searching for family outside of myself. And so that's, like, again, that's young adolescence, young adulthood. You flash forward then to me being 31 and my dad died. And there's these people coming out of the woodworks that are my family, my aunts and my uncles and my grandmother, who think that they know my dad to be one way, but have no clue about the abuse.
Right.
They have no clue about the name calling. They have no clue about the gaslighting, and they have no clue about anything. And they're wondering where I've been. I had to disconnect myself from my family a long time ago because I made the choice that anytime I was around my grandmother, she berated me. And my grandmother lived with my uncle, and my uncle was a quadriplegic, and so he couldn't travel. So everyone traveled to his house. His house was the epicenter of all family gatherings. And because my grandmother didn't like me, I wasn't allowed to go to my uncle's house. As a matter of
Mm,
fact, I was on my way to go see my uncle the last time, but my grandmother called and said, I don't remember why, but I'm mad at you, so you can't come over. And then my uncle died a couple of months later. This happened just a few years ago. So all that to say, when my dad died, and, like, I'm having to, like, talk to these people, and
Right.
like reconnecting with these people, and they're mourning their loss of this person in their life, and then I'm like simultaneously trying to explain to them why I'm partly relieved, partly sad, partly mad, because I for the longest had been wanting to ask my dad some of these questions, like what did you talk to that little boy about after you caught him fondling me, or why did you punish me so harshly, or like there's so many things that you
Mm.
never. My whole life up until my father's death had been defined by in relationship to my relationship with him. I was the daughter of this guy. I was the daughter to this, like this monster. I had to deal with this. So when he died, I had to reevaluate my whole narrative because this
Yeah.
person didn't exist. This thing didn't exist anymore that I had been defining myself in relation to. So since it was gone, I couldn't be the, I had no, I felt like I had no real reason to be so forlorn. I didn't have this looming, daunting monster person that I'm still trying to make proud and get their validation because maybe if they're proud, then they'll stop drinking. And,
Yeah.
consciously and cognitively, I knew I could never save him. But I think on some small level, your inner child's still always trying to save your parent, that you see broken and
Yeah.
hurting.
Yeah.
Um, and
But you can.
so, no, no. And I learned that the hard way. But his death in the moment it was such a relief. But then it was also it was such an overwhelming moment because I just didn't know who I was. Like, who am I now?
Yeah.
And so I think that's what that spiral was. It was just me really sinking further into the trauma that I had yet to really look at and unpack.
Hmm.
And finally, me getting to the point where I was like, okay, I'm ready to deal with the feelings.
Yeah. And probably recognizing how big the feelings are and what type of mountain you have ahead of you to climb, I would imagine.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, sitting there looking up at it like, shit, all right, here we go.
And I think for the first time too, I felt like I was entitled to my feelings. I'd been
Mm.
gaslit my whole life and told that I was dramatic or like sensitive. I was raised by a black man, and well, mixed. I don't think he knew he was mixed, but and then my brother, and then my uncle. I had no real females around me, so I mean, I didn't realize this until my later years, looking back. Like, oh, that's why I have such masculine energy, and that's why I
Mm.
am the way that I am because I was raised by men,
Mm.
and had no female maternal connections. And it's a very different way of
Yeah.
being a man versus being a woman. I mean, not that I know from experience, but I could only surmise based on my very superficial experience. Um, but yeah, that just the relief, finally understanding I could create like I could be my own person, was very
I guess
liberating.
in creating your own person, how do you go about doing that when who you are at your core is a mystery to you, right? Like I think.
I don't think it, the specificity or the specifics of who I was didn't matter. I knew I was good, and I knew I was sad, and I knew I
Okay.
was wronged. And that was enough for me to know that I could keep pressing forward and I would figure it out and I would
Mm.
get to know myself because I knew I was underneath all of the pain. I wasn't my pain,
Right.
right? And so I didn't know who I was, but I knew who I wasn't, and I knew who I didn't want to be. And that was enough
Sure.
to start kind of like, oh, not this. Oh, not this. I don't like this. And I'm kind of like that to this day. I still don't necessarily know what I want to be when I grow up. Like
Right.
I've got a 9 to 5 at a corporate gig, but it's not. I've been here for 8 years. Like I said, love the place because they've held me down through a lot of trials and tribulations. But I don't want to be in corporate America working for the man the rest of my life. What do I want to be? I don't know. But I know what I don't want to be. And so that's what I live by until I know something for certain. Because it pings in my body when I know.
I love that. I love that. I wanted to ask you. I mean, obviously, your brother's not here and he can't speak for himself, but was he able to get out of this relatively unscathed, or
No,
has?
no.
Okay.
But his addiction looks different. His addiction is more of an emotional repression.
Mm.
He was able to manage his relationship with alcohol. He has his own very deep traumas that he's experienced, and has I think is what has moved him in the direction of like being addicted to emotional repression. I think he's addicted to being rational. I think he's addicted to being logical,
Right.
which I can love and respect. But sometimes I'm like, I know there's a feeling under there. He's gotten a
Mm,
lot more in tune with his feelings over the years as he's done his own work. He's actually ended up getting a career in social work. So as you know, by proxy, you have to take those classes, and he's actually now on his way to becoming a therapist himself. So he's getting the
mm,
work he needs himself, and it's allowed him to become a lot more emotionally available, which has really matured our relationship because I feel like there was a period in time when I needed more from him and couldn't get it.
mm.
And then he wanted me to just calm the fuck down and I couldn't because I was hurting, you know? So now
Yeah.
we're like meeting each other in the middle. But no, he definitely did not get through unscathed, but it just looks different. And his relationship with alcohol is tenuous, but it didn't ever get to the point where, he can't not have a relationship with it.
Gotcha.
He has a healthy relationship with it, but he's got to keep it in check.
Gotcha.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, when you got siblings, you all come from the same place and have your own version of the story, and how it's affected you. I was just curious how, because in my experience, and I don't really talk a lot about my siblings on this podcast, but I have one sister who is closest in age. She's 2 years younger than I am, and a lot of the stuff that we grew up together, and she's been able to blossom in her own right, in her own
Mm,
way, and hasn't really fallen victim to maybe victim's not even the right word, didn't take the path that I took, and
yeah,
but it's always just curious to me how siblings can spend so much time together and and spend so much time combating the same issues in life in those formative years and turn out like completely different you know uh
totally, right?
um so let's fast forward. So you're now you got, oh, here's my son, he just popped in.
Oh, hi.
This
Hi,
is
so
Chris.
cute.
Let me finish up and then I'll come upstairs, okay? I love you. um
I'm
you
so
spend
happy
so
for him and you that he'll
Thank
get to
you.
have this version of you.
Yeah, this he's I mean, that was part of my reasoning, right? It's like,
Hmm.
how do I set him up for success
But
by
that doesn't
also
matter. You
setting
didn't have to
myself up
make
for
but you didn't
success?
have to make that choice.
No, you're right.
My dad didn't. Neither did my mom. It took her a while to get sober. She got sober a little bit after my dad died, as a matter of fact.
Mm,
But you didn't have to make that choice, and you did. So good
yeah.
on you.
Yeah, but to your point earlier, I mean, it's gotta start with you, right? Like, I mean, I was looking at my son, I was looking at my daughter, I was looking at, my wife, and ultimately, and I had looked at them in the past, and ultimately, I had to get to a place where I said, "I gotta change this for me, first and foremost, because ultimately, that's the only way that this is gonna be successful for them."
Hmm.
Um, and, so in that, I wanted to fast forward back into your story. You are 30 days sober, you're back into your role, and now the entire world is Chris's oyster, right? So what do you do once you've reintegrated back into your life, back into your company, back into your family? What are some of the tools that you at that point turn to continue to evolve yourself into the person you were becoming?
I think the biggest hurdle that I had to over at that juncture was the shame in the moments that I wasn't sober, right? Like, "Oh, remember when so and so saw you at like," and seeing the people now and having to have the conversations and holding yourself accountable and like,
Mm,
I was going through a hard time, but now I'm trying to get my life together. All of that shame that just felt so thick and sticky and heavy and like tar in my chest. Wasn't looking forward to going back to work and having to have conversations with some people or talking about these things with family members. And so, um, having
Before
having
you move on,
faith. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, how long did that feeling of shame last? I mean, you're 6 years in, at this point. How did you kind of move through it so you were able to leave that shame where it deserved to be versus, being a part of your life?
It still flares up occasionally, very rarely, but I'm very like I'm very black and white. Once I make a decision, I stick to it. And so when I'd realized that holding on to the shame, um, it was unnecessary because other people are going to forget. Like I had the experience of people forgiving me and telling me they were proud of me, and oh my God, no, like, and so there was really no reason for me to hold on to the shame. If anything, that was just going to weigh me down in the future and make staying sober harder. That I could
Mm,
actually be proud of myself and
yeah,
be root myself in the pride versus root myself in the shame. And so when I made that decision to just lean into the pride versus leaning into the shame, it made it a lot easier to have those conversations, and to take the more optimistic and hopeful, perspective and lens on that conversation than the more shameful and deprecative lens.
gotcha.
Like I was showing up and doing something different every day, and I was committed to showing up and doing something every day, and that was enough for me to be like, yeah, I fucked up,
Right.
but I had
Yeah.
good reason. I didn't
No,
hurt anybody, so
no, I think that
it's
makes
okay.
a lot of sense. I think that a lot of folks who, who've suffered with an addiction, and shame is part of the narrative, right? Like, and what is my relationship with shame, right? And how do I kind of retool it so that ultimately I can use it as a propeller as opposed to an anchor. And I think that
Right.
that's something that sounds like
Right, like,
you're
what
able
is
to.
this shame telling me? It's telling me maybe like, what is it telling me today? When I feel shame today, usually it's telling me that I'm maybe not doing something that's in alignment with who I am,
Mhm.
or maybe there's some false perception or narrative out there that doesn't seem to jive with what I think or feel. But is it real? No. Okay. So I can move on and forward
Cool.
from it.
Yeah. So you're saying that faith was also a part of your
Yeah. Well, yeah,
your
here's the
journey?
thing too, because in the moment that I got sober, I, in addition to thinking like I have to do everything different, there was this thought of like, I think the first time I tried to kill myself, I was maybe 7. And I tried to kill myself on numerous occasions up until I got sober. I think maybe even right before I went on that last medical leave, I tried to overdose on sleeping pills. Oh,
Mm,
that was the worst. And waking up after that kind of shit is the worst feeling. It's worse than a hangover. It's worse than alcohol poisoning. And it
mm,
lasts forever. You're hallucinating. You're in a whole other world. And so it got to a point where it was like, I can keep trying to die and waking up and having these experiences, or I can try to live in a completely different way.
mm,
I think I want to go that route because this physical and the physiological feelings of all this stuff, the physiological sensations, it hurts.
yeah.
So let me just see if I can position myself so that I'm not adding any additional weight. I'm not compounding this pain that I'm already feeling. Let me not. Let me not talk to myself in a way that's compounding it. Let me not ingest things that will compound it. Let me not touch, like, everything we consume in any kind of way has an impact on us, and I've always felt that. And so I was being very mindful of what I was consuming. I was reading nothing but Paulo Coelho books. First one was The Alchemist.
Mm,
Um, I read Untethered Soul. I think I read 90 books in 90 days. I was just consuming, like much like you were talking about your journey as well, just consuming anything and everything that was positive and affirming and spiritual and constructive, and that helped
mm,
it helped it helped kick out at the ankles all this negative self-talk and all of the lack of faith and the shame, and really replace it really quickly with just faith and hope and optimism. Because here's the thing, I believe my whole life, even in the midst of all of my traumas, is that life is hard, right? Like, externally speaking, circumstantially speaking, so much is out of our control. It's hard, but it doesn't have to be. Internally, we have so many choices. Well, got two choices. We can choose to be happy or not. That's what the
right.
untethered soul taught me. So if I can choose to be happy, I'm going to do what it takes to go down that path. Because I know what not happy looks like. I was there for a
Sure.
long time, and I don't want to go there.
Yeah. I,
you
I I
know,
f- I I feel you on that. I mean, when you've had an opportunity to see what the bottom of the barrel looks like, you know that that's not where you want to be spending any more time.
exactly.
So I feel you on that. Talk to me about how you then turn this kind of light that you've started to harness outward, right? Where other folks are now starting to see it. Because that's where I started to see you. I mean, on social, I'll say, but nonetheless, that's where your light. For those who don't know you, is starting to come through. What did that moment look like for you? Did you have some sort of epiphany where you're like, you know what, I got to start putting this out there, for others, and how did that transition go? Because like for me, you know, I spent a lot of time keeping it all right here, and and maybe that's a control thing. I don't know, right? And then ultimately I said, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to create this show. I'm going to talk about what it is for me. I want to hear how others feel about it. So what did that moment or that shift look like for you where you said, you know what? I'm going to start letting others in on my light.
It paralleled in my personal life too. It actually started from my personal life.
Okay.
I've lived this life. I've collected these experiences. Who you're talking to now, who I am in these posts. This is the person who shows up every day. This is the person that goes to work. This is who shows up in corporate America. A lot of the stuff that I say is probably not appropriate in corporate, but I do it anyway because I care more about the spirits that show up than the
Yeah,
cause,
but
right?
some folks in your office got to be like, I can't wait for Chris to get here today.
I mean, let's just say I'm a project manager and like I have 100% schedule attainment. No one else does. But it's because people want to work for me and with me, right? It's because I
Yeah.
recognize their humanity and that's really all I care about. But um, I was single for 15 years before I got into this relationship that I'm now in, and we're engaged. We've been together now a little over 3, going on 4 years. And that was
Congratulations.
intentional. I was single for 15 years intentionally. Thank you. I knew I could not be the partner that I wanted. So I was not going to subject anyone else to the misery that was me. I needed to do the work to attract the partner that I needed to be the partner that I wanted to attract, right? So I did all that work. So my partner is in entertainment. She's a performer. She does all that stuff. I was a performer when I was a kid. Then I developed shame and stopped. But I've always longed to. I'm a writer. I'm a poet. I paint. I do a lot of creative stuff. I play guitar. I sing in my shower. I'm my goal is to karaoke one day. I'm still talking about that in therapy. Uh, but
Okay.
I'm also control. I'm crippled by perfectionism. It's
Yeah.
terrible. It's a terrible plight for a creative. But I consider myself to be a creative person at heart, and so uh, I'm in my relationship. I'm watching my partner flourish and have fun with all of her creative endeavors. And she's getting lost in the sauce doing her thing. And while I'm on a break from my corporate gig, I'm idling and not knowing what to do in my world. Like, I know I could write, I know I could journal, I know I could take this stuff and put it into this, and I know I could do that. But I didn't know. And I want to connect with people and I want to talk to people and I have things to say. And I miss taking my Lyft rides because I used to always talk to my Lyft drivers. Every single Lyft drive was this kind of conversation.
Mm,
So I didn't have as many opportunities to engage with people, and it's like I know I want to talk about these kinds of things. I just don't know how to go about doing it. And what the idea just dawned on me to just do videos, and it ended up turning into this practice of, okay, we're going to do videos. It's going to be like an improv. You're just going to share a thought and a feeling that comes to mind, and you're going to
mm,
record it and you're going to share it, even if you don't like the way that it came out. Even like I don't allow myself to do more than like 2 or 3 takes on anything because the perfectionist in me can watch it back and be like, I don't like the phrasing. I don't do that because I want it to be as authentic and off the cuff and like from spirit to my heart to you as possible.
mm,
Um, I was also up until I started doing these posts, I had 500 followers, I think, on Instagram. Most of my posts were like really pretty photos that I'd taken, but none of them of me. I don't
mm,
like to be seen. I don't like to be
right.
heard. I like to hide. I like to be in the cut. That's why my TikTok handle's Chris in the cut. I like to like drop a piece of wisdom and then run away. Like, don't stay on me for too long, you know?
Right.
And so I was like, you can't do that. And I want to change the world though at the same time. And you can't change the world from the past, from the back, from the cut, in the shadows, like as effectively as I want to, right? Like I genuinely want to start a movement and I feel like it can happen. Call me crazy. And so multitude of things. We got to battle this perfectionism. We got to just start putting your stuff out there and like who cares, right? Like it'll catch whoever it needs to catch. It'll touch whoever it needs to touch. You need to be seen. It's really uncomfortable and that's okay. We're going to practice that. Consistency. We're going to practice doing something every single day. And it was really overwhelming at first because I was recording my videos every day and posting every day. I got a
Hmm.
trial and error. I got a good process down, film in batches, edit every day, post every day. But
Yeah.
this whole endeavor break it down. Top line. I love to ramble. I'm learning that in this conversation with you. I am a rambling woman.
I
Uh,
love listening to ramble, so it's all good.
but to top line it, to summarize it, I wanted to get out of my own way, out of my own
Mhm.
comfort zone. I wanted to I wanted to add more love and kindness to the world. I was meeting so many people and listening to so many people talk about themselves in such demeaning and self-deprecative ways. They're being so mean to themselves and so punitive. And I
Yeah.
don't like seeing people hurting themselves. Like, life is hard enough. I wanted to add to the kindness and to the goodness, and I wanted to give people tools. Like, we can't all afford therapy. We can't all find good therapists. Not all of us believe in therapy, especially in this community, right? Our
Mhm.
BIPOC community. So I wanted to find a way to just share what I've gleaned along the way. I
Yeah.
don't like the fact that I've got a pretty face. I've never been a fan of this thing because then people assume you're one kind of way. It is another kind of privilege. I do get people tend to be kinder to me, and I don't think that's fair. But if that is what it is, let me use it. If I can use this fucking face to spread some love, and like, I'm so surprised. There are so many thug ass black men that like receive my message, and I'm like, this is dope because like they wouldn't otherwise. Like,
Yeah.
I've gotten in, I've infiltrated, and I love that. And if I'm gonna use what I've got, even if I don't necessarily. It's something that I've hidden. I don't feel comfortable in. I do this only for these videos and these kinds of conversations. I don't get gussied up like this for the outside world. You know why? Because I get preyed on out there. I
Mhm.
swear, at least once a day, I almost get kidnapped because I also look quite young for my age, right? I'll be 37, and people think like I'm in high school. So, oh,
Mhm.
little girl, hop in my van. So it's a whole thing.
Right.
But I just want to spread some love. I just want to spread some kindness. And I don't, there's so much bullshit out there, you know? And there's so many people doing this type of motivational, inspirational shit for the wrong reasons. So also
Mhm.
people who do this shit, and I think that their presentation of it's still very negatively based. Some of the language that they use is very negative heavy, like, don't do this, stop doing this, that. And even that language is kind of harsh, right? When we're talking
Yeah.
with ourselves. I love to encourage people to use more affirming language. Encourage yourself to do things. Try not to reprimand yourself for the things you do. Encourage yourself to do different things, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've been, like I said, I've been following you for a while. I think it's fantastic. I think it's your message has a very loving tone, um, and for me, this is all about stacking days. For me, that consistency is huge, and I feel like when folks are looking for light, being able to find it when they need it is
Mm-hmm.
important, and you show up consistently so that they can do just that. So, and I mean, and it's not even like this is not an alcohol sobriety thing. This is just how do you how can you feel like a better person if you're not accustomed to doing it for yourself.
You just,
I
yeah.
find you do a really good job in kind of shepherding folks on your platform, even them thug
Those
dudes.
thug ass, I'm telling you, I'm like, okay. It's hard though. I mean, like, don't get it twisted. I have my days. More often than not, I have my days where it's hard. I get folks in the comments just wanting to say shit, and I'm like, why are you trying? I'm really just here to love and heal. There's no reason why you need to say that this isn't of God, or this isn't like, you don't need to find flaw in what I'm sharing. Really,
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
unnecessary. Or there are messages that I send out and it's like nobody's looking at it. But then I'm like, but why are you doing this? You're not doing it for metrics. You're doing this because you have a message to share. You're
Yeah,
doing this because you're trying to show people the truth in what you're saying. That, like, yes, there are people you're going to run up against that have everything to say that's against you, but just keep shining because it's not
yeah,
about what they have to say. It's about what you are contributing to the space that you are in. And it's hard. I'm here to tell you guys, it's hard. It's not easy, but that's the growth. And if you do that, it becomes easier over time. It's never easy. It's never easy. It just gets easier,
yeah.
you know?
I mean, that's the goal, right? Is to make it easier, and that's what the one day at a time mantra is
Mm-hmm.
that you're not going to be able to conquer it all in a day.
Nope.
It's just not going to happen. Uh, I have a couple more questions as we close up
Yeah.
here, Chris, and I'll get you going here, even though I could probably talk to you for another hour at least.
Anytime, man.
I appreciate it. One question is, for someone who's sitting there at home, struggling with any addiction, but in this case, we're talking about alcohol, and they're saying to themselves, I got to do something different here. My life is unraveling all the way hell around me. I just can't manage my life right now. And what would you say to that person who's listening right now? What would you say could be the first step that they could take in moving in a different direction?
Calling a friend or someone that they trust and sharing that truth,
Cool.
being brave
Simple
enough.
as that.
Because I think so. Because if you're at that point, that means you're ready and willing to take the next step.
Yeah.
I did wasn't it took me a minute to get there, but if you're there and if you're, like, really you're like, "I need to make a change. My life is unmanageable, and I can't do this." Call somebody and share it because it will hold you to it. It's too easy to get lost in the sauce of what's going on in your mind,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then nothing becomes real, but the moment you say it out loud, the moment you share it with somebody else that you trust, it becomes real, and it also becomes a little bit less heavy. That person can totally share that. I actually just recently had a friend call me and ask me that same question who's trying to get sober. She said, "How did you get to the point where you made that choice?" And I said, "I had no other choice. I felt
Yeah.
like I ran out of other options and I was tired of waking up and feeling this way."
Yeah.
So I just took the step forward. I took a step out on faith and tried something new, and eventually it felt better. But I also told my best friend, and she supported me, you know. I said it out loud. I made it real. Make it real. If
You
you
know, they
want to
say,
make a change, make it real.
yeah, they say if you can name it, you can tame it. Is that
It
the
is so
adage?
true. Yeah, and it's very true.
No.
Because then you know what's driving anything, right? Like, because that's what's driving our behavior, our feelings. So if you can name the feeling, it can help you. It's the beginning to the taming of it, right?
Yeah. It also helps to have a Melva or two
Oh,
that are
man, totally. I mean, you
that
really
are
can't
out
get
there.
through it alone, but that's why these meetings, any type of program is great because
Yeah.
the moment you walk in, it's all cheesy and it's cringy. It's cringy. You don't want to do that. It's culty before you go. It's cringy and culty. But then you get there and you hear other people sharing stories that are just dripping with shame. And you're like, "Fuck, me too, man."
Yeah.
And there's that the commiseration is real in the beginning stages because it's hard and it's gross and we want to be mad and we want to hate the world. So find people to commiserate with, you know. Either
Yeah.
share your truth, make it real, or find like-minded folks who are of the healing persuasion.
Yeah. I agree with all that for sure. Um, Last question I have for you.
Mm.
In communities of color, I mean, you talked about this earlier, how we keep everything, we keep everything in house. We don't talk about this, that, and the next. But to your point, we also don't talk about it in our own home, right? So oftentimes it gets so far gone that it's too late. And so my
Mhm.
question for you is, for how would someone, how would they have known that you were struggling with the things that you were struggling with without you being explicit in saying so? Like, what were some of the
They
signs that?
they wouldn't have. The only person who really knew was my best friend, well, and my brother, but that's just because they saw me in it, right? But I kept my circle small for a reason, and I compartmentalized the expression of the extreme
Mhm.
drunkenness. So I wasn't like unhinged until I was home in private, but publicly I was high functioning, and so no one would have known. But what I would tell people who have, or what I would suggest to people who might have people in their life that they're concerned about, is to be a good human being or be a good friend, be a good family member, be a good sibling, be a good cousin, be a good whomever, and tell your people how you feel.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and if they react and are offended, it's because it's coming from shame and guilt because they're doing things they know they shouldn't be doing or don't want to do. And don't take it personally.
Yeah.
But just tell people how you feel. I think that's, if anybody would have said anything to me to help, I think that would have been the most helpful, is if they came and said, "I'm concerned about you, or I love you. Are you okay?"
Yeah.
I think
I
we're
think sometimes
afraid of going there and we shouldn't
I was
be.
gonna, yeah, and I was gonna say sometimes just opening the door and maybe that conversation isn't, doesn't happen in the moment, but the door is open, right? And I think that,
Exactly.
that's really important. Um, Chris, I do want folks to know where to find you if they want some more of this light. So if you could share all the spaces that you occupy where folks can do that, that would be great.
Yes, certainly. I'm on Instagram and my handle's Chris, Krees 1020. So Crease. If you're Filipino, Crease 1029. That's my birthday. Happy early birthday to me. And then on TikTok, I'm Chris in the Cut. You can also find me on Facebook. Just search for Chris Elliot. I'm not the white male actor we all know and love from Scary Movie
Okay.
or Cabin Fever. Not that one, the other one.
Fair. Cool. Chris, thank you so much for spending
No,
some
thank you.
time with me today. I really do appreciate the conversation. And just keep doing what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. And I'm so glad that you took some time with us today.
No, thanks, my friend. Right back at you. Please, please. I'm so proud of you. Thank you for being just a stellar, an amazing example of a Black man and being a stellar Black father and raising these beautiful children that you have.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. Have a great
Anytime.
rest of the day, okay?
You too.
I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices and healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.